If the cartels decide to do something, they don't leave things half done. The footage that we saw on the day in question was a pickup truck with three individuals with weapons that then involved themselves in this pickup of the individuals from the Carolinas. That is not how the cartels operate.
Mexico, where authorities in Texas actually have warned that US citizens shouldn't travel to Mexico for spring break, saying that drug cartel violence represented a significant threat for anybody crossing into the country. It comes after 4 Americans were kidnapped by a drug cartel and 2 of them murdered when they visited the town, a town in Mexico. There's a twist to this story, though. The cartel later issued an apology, handing over its own gunman to the police. Well, Jon Bonfiglio is in Mexico for us tonight and joins us from there this evening. Hello, John.
Good evening, Darrell.
Extraordinary story, this, isn't it? Take us back to this kidnapping. A group of Americans kidnapped by Mexican cartels. And what happened next?
Well, there's a lot about this story that actually still doesn't really make sense. And this started now 9 days ago. So the event in question took place a week last Friday with the disappearance of these 4 individuals who'd driven down from the Carolinas in the US, crossed over for what we understood at the time, or a few days later, was medical procedures, because a lot of people with the cost of medical services in the US cross over to Mexico. And then it seems that they were confused for other cartel members, a rival cartel group, or Haitian drugs smugglers, because they were African American. And this group of armed individuals started firing on them in the middle of the street in broad daylight, and obviously all hell broke loose. We didn't find out about this until the Monday, so this was very much there was news taking place, and which is reaching social media in particular, but there were no formal announcements made until Monday, when everything really hit the press and hit the media, and we began to see a lot of the footage regarding what took place on that particular day. And then, of course, it became an international incident, with the US lawmakers in particular saying they were going to designate the cartels terrorist organizations. The Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, commonly referred to as AMLO, was regularly on media saying that they're doing their darndest to get these people back and so on. And in the middle of the week, remarkably, for a country that fails to solve the vast majority of its crimes, these 4 individuals were located in a shack 15 miles outside the town of Matamoros in Tamaulipas, and were then, in inverted commas, rescued. And then 24 hours later, in an even bigger twist, the cartel members who were supposed to have, who we understand, or were told by the cartel itself, that were the individuals that caused this issue and the killing and the kidnap, themselves were in the center of the city, bound, tied, and handed over with a note apologizing to the citizens for a breakdown in order in the cartels, and handing them over to the police. The very same day, interestingly, the Mexican government began briefing that these individuals that crossed over into Mexico perhaps were involved in some kind of other activity, because they actually all had drugs offenses records in the Carolinas as well. So there's still a lot of open questions about this, but certainly in terms of the day-to-day, what took place, absolutely remarkable.
Right. And so the apology letter that the cartel gave, I'm going to just read a little bit here, because it accused this gun cartel, a gunman, who was left at the roadside and handed over, of acting under their own decision-making and lack of discipline, as well as supposedly breaking cartel rules over protecting the lives of the innocent. That's what the note said. What does that tell us about these rules that the cartel community work by?
So I think it tells us a couple of things. The first thing is, for anybody that sees the footage, or anybody that knows anything about the cartels, if the cartels decide to do something, they don't leave things half done. The footage that we saw on the day in question was a pickup truck with 3 individuals with weapons that then involved themselves in this pickup of the individuals from the Carolinas. That is not how the cartels operate. That is a lot left to chance in broad daylight, with the possibilities of police, other military coming in, and so on. So it was really clear from that footage that they were, at the very best, a minor criminal organization, or perhaps even a splinter group of a cartel. And that, to my mind, is what took place here. I don't think this was a sanctioned hit by the cartels in any way, shape, or form. And again, going back to what we said a minute ago about the fact that we're now encouraged to believe that the government solved this case and brought the individuals, or at least rescued the American citizens and repatriated them, given the fact that they are unable to do this in the vast majority of other cases in the country. Clearly, what took place is that the government did not have a foothold on the matter, and it was the overwhelming political strength and also physical strength of the cartels, and in this case specifically the Gulf cartel, that found the individuals, that released them, and then brought the criminals to book or handed them over, at least in the center of the town. So, whether we like it or not, the reason this all got solved was because the cartels decided that they were going to solve it, and they solved it from one day to the next.
Right. And so I think that's a good point, John, to take us into this sort of strange sense of civic duty that the cartels feel they have, a sort of twisted code of ethics, as it were. Are they sort of like, do they see themselves as sort of Robin Hood-like organizations?
You can look at it two ways. I mean, on the one hand, yes, they see that they have a civic duty, but I think it's also a little bit more cynical than that. Throughout history, bandit organizations have needed to slip in and out of a populace. They need the support of a populace in order to escape, to hide, to get away from problems. They need to co-opt a populace. So it's no great surprise here then that during, say, the pandemic, or if there's a hurricane, that the first people on the scene, the first organizations on the scene, almost always are the cartels, with food, with logistic support, and so often even with their own branding. So famously, the Sinaloa cartel, El Chapo's cartel, were during the pandemic giving out boxes with his image on the front of the box as well. So, whichever way you look at it, the cartels across Mexico in their local spaces have pretty significant, overwhelming support. And also a second point to make here, which is really important, is that they are generally favored way over the political classes and government.
The best way really to understand the cartels, I think when we think about the cartels, we think of sort of criminal organizations, if you like, but actually they're much bigger and stronger than that. And they exist in every level of Mexican politics and society. And they are, by some distance, the most powerful organizations in the country. They also recognize that they need to take local populations along with them for their own good. So oftentimes what takes place when there is a natural disaster or during the COVID pandemic and so on, is that the cartels will be the first organizations on the ground with their own care packages, food support, infrastructure, and so on. And again, you can look at that two ways. You can look at that as just the fact that they have this sort of civic code. But the other way of looking at it is that they recognize, that they realize that they fundamentally need the support of the local population in order to be able to exist. And so it is very much if you like, a political ploy.
And I guess there's also the relationship between America and Mexico to consider here as well, right? Because just to bring us to where we are tonight, which is Texan officials saying don't travel to Mexico, what does this do for relations between the two countries?
Well, it certainly doesn't do anything for relations between the two countries when US lawmakers threaten to put boots on the ground, military fatigues on the ground in Mexico, and the retort from the Mexican president and various other politicians in Mexico is to say that Mexico has its own territorial integrity and autonomy, and that simply cannot happen. To be clear, as you've just said, the Texas Department of Public Safety has warned against specifically spring break travel to Mexico. That's the news headline. In a way, it's not a surprise because the US travel advice is already not to travel to 6 states, including Tamaulipas, where this incident occurred. And that also mirrors UK travel advice, which is not to travel to a number of states, including Tamaulipas. But I think it's also important contextually to realize that Mexico is the 14th biggest country on earth. And for sure, there are problems and high rates of crime related to the cartels in certain areas. But actually, in terms of what a visitor to Mexico is likely to encounter as compared to various other countries, is really, it is significantly safer here than it would be in most cities and locations of comparable size internationally, including the USA and the UK.